All right, guys, I'm still buzzing from this past Saturday. That was a proper combat sports event. 18,000 and change went to the Honda Center in Anaheim, California, and they yelled, they screamed, they taunted, they drank, more yelling, more drinking. Some booze even rained down. A Mexican wave broke out. I mean, they were going this way on two levels. Then they were going in reverse against each other. It was mayhem, guys. I loved it. Diaz versus Masvidal 2 was a hit, a home run, if you will. I want to know your thoughts. You guys are the stars of the show. Matt Wells, what did you think of Diaz versus Masvidal 2, the boxing event?
Well, I'll tell you what, like just based on, your tweet in particular, George, that shot of the crowd, it really showed that, Nate Diaz can draw a decent sized, arena still at this point in his career. And obviously that rivalry with Masvidal was very heated, and the build up to it and everything like that, it made for what I believe came off as a pretty damn good event, an entertaining one even. From watching at home, this felt like a Showtime production. I mean, it pretty much was a Showtime boxing production. Like I was telling you guys in the chat, you replaced the FanMio logo with Showtime, and it's the same sort of feel that you had when you were sitting there watching at home, minus the issues I had with the screen personally, that it shut off for me on, for half of the fight. But other than that, I mean, it was a fun event. The way it came off, the undercard was actually very entertaining. And then of course the main event was a fun fight as well. Back and forth. It wasn't the highest level boxing in the world, of course, because we had two guys knocking on 40 years old, MMA fighters going in there to box with, no threats of a takedown or kicks or anything like that. And obviously we kind of see the striking discrepancy there in the stand-up. But I think it was a fun fight, and I think it came off as entertaining, which at the end of the day, that's what we're here to be, is entertained. And I was thoroughly sports entertained by this event.
Yeah, and it went late into the night too. I felt that, and I was in the time zone of when it happened, but it was late. Nolan King, you were on the worst time zone possible here in the continental United States, but you were tweeting. Looked like you were having fun.
Yeah, just when I thought I was out on the MMA fighters doing boxing thing, I guess I'm stuck back in a little bit. I think that was pretty much a best case scenario. The entertainment was there. Both guys looked pretty good. I wasn't really sure what to expect when guys step outside the UFC and they step outside of the organization that they've been working with for so many years. How motivated will they be in the gym? What will they look like when they get in the ring or the cage? In terms of their physical shape, in terms of their abilities. But it's pretty clear to me both these guys took this fight very seriously. Their cardio held up great. Their volume was pretty crazy as well. And just, sure, it wasn't the most technical boxing match of all time. I'm not sure any of these guys will be vying for a title in the world of boxing anytime soon. But for me, I thought it was highly entertaining. And really, they can't be mad about what they did on Saturday. I think that the fans got their money's worth. For those that were able to watch, I know FanMio crashed there for a bit, but great fight all around. Best case scenario, close fight. I'm sure we can maybe dive into the scorecards here in a bit, but overall, I think the main event delivered, and that's the most important thing when you kind of go rogue with one of these pay-per-views like this.
Definitely, we are going to spend some time on this topic, but let's get one more reaction from Goes. You were in the arena, Goes, and we haven't covered too many events lately because we do watch-alongs. The Apex has a lot of shows that we just, don't go to. But man, I think you had the same feeling as me. Just wow.
Well, I'm gonna have to eat a lot of crow. I'm gonna start off with Nolan King. Congratulations to your Boston Celtics. I hate them, but I love you. Second crow serving is gonna be this. I mean, when this fight was made, I thought, why are we doing this? This has already been settled, and we don't really need to see it again, let alone in boxing. As things started progressing, and the YouTube series came out, right, which was their version of kind of like a 24/7, I started to get more into it. When I saw the prices drop, I thought, uh-oh, we might be in trouble here. I couldn't have been more wrong. Being at that arena, even early, it had a good amount of people there early. I thought that was so impressive. Yep. They treated it like a proper boxing event. And I feel like if you're a boxing fan that knew nothing about some of the MMA guys that were performing, I think you probably still would have had a good time if you showed up in the arena. for some of the reasons that George stated, right? The crowd was just absolutely bananas. I've never seen a wave go in two different directions before in my life. They were into just about every fight. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, it was very, very entertaining. I thought they were brilliant in the way that they sold this. So in bringing in some of, if you're an old school guy like me and you see people like Fernando Vargas, him coming out with his son, Shane Mosley, his son was on the card, right?
Mhm.
Even Ryan Garcia, as controversial as he is, even he was out there, right, with his brother. There was just so much to like about this if you're a combat sports fan, that it was tremendous in the arena. I heard on the broadcast, because I didn't watch it, I was there. I heard Sean O'Malley did his part on the broadcast. He did a brilliant job. And he's an MMA guy, right? Mauro Ranallo, a voice that we're used to hearing on both sides. Like, these guys really put attention into detail. And I think it really played out. I can't wait for something like this to happen again. I don't know that it'll be a home run with just about anybody. You have to have the right combination. And Nate Diaz, he is big part of that equation, right? His following is just tremendous. And all that for not even being a needle mover, right, guys?
Right. That's right. The needle mover. Holy, he was a needle mover on Saturday. That's for sure. Goes, and I'm not sure if you left out Floyd Mayweather. He also
was
accompanied
there, yeah.
one of his boxers. So they sprinkled in a little bit for the MMA fan, the boxing fan. I think just someone who's a sports entertainment fan. I bet you there was a lot of people there that were like, what is this? What are we going to? All right, let's go. But I mean, suites were filled. Like, there was suites that were filled. There was no part where the curtain was blocking to hide empty seats. Nothing, man. 18,000 and change were there, and it was beautiful. I want to go back to something Matt said. Yeah, the crowd, they were good and bad. They did have some boos, and it was ironic because the two guys with the cleanest boxing, Mosley Jr. and Jacobs, were out there being surgical, and throwing very nice techniques, sweet science on display, and they were getting booed. And I think that's because it was an MMA fan that's used to the slobber knocker, the blood, the knees. They weren't getting it. So it was irony there, but hopefully, they also saw that it was a higher level than the people they were there to cheer for. And so hopefully they became boxing fans. Because I think the more boxing fans, the better for MMA, and vice versa as well. But I mean,
George, you know what, though, to that point, I think that was the brilliance of the matchmaking on the card. They kind of made it so they kind of make everyone happy, right? With a mixed martial arts card, if the main event doesn't deliver, you have like 11 more fights that could possibly make you happy. In boxing, it's so tied up in that main event.
Yeah.
And they kind of took a page from MMA and they sprinkled different scenarios throughout the card that could kind of maybe make you happy if this didn't play out. And I think that's what was so fun about this card is normally when you go to a boxing fight, especially here in Las Vegas, you're gambling till about 7:30, and then you go, we better get in there. Yeah. They didn't make it like that for this card. They made it so that you kind of want to get there relatively early, and I think that was the difference, and it paid out.
I think there was 10 boxing matches, and we walked in on the fourth one, and it was about 80% full, and I could tell, okay, this thing's gonna sell out. It was just filling up. Only the suites were kind of not looking empty, but again, those are the people that are getting their $200 steaks. They want to do the grand entrance or whatever. But I mean, the suites filled up, and like I say, it was a hit, man. But key matchmaking: Ryan Garcia's brother, Sean Garcia, versus Fernando Vargas' son, Amado Vargas. Like, you got Oxnard, and I know the Vargases are now in Las Vegas, but they're from Oxnard, which is about an hour and a half away, versus Victorville. Those fans were loud, man. And there was still 4 more fights to get to the main event, but they kind of really, really set the thing going. I can't believe Ryan Garcia personally was there. That is a disgusting human being right now, in my opinion. Yeah. I just can't believe he had the balls to show. He kind of shitted on his brother at that time. Call me a soy boy, call me whatever you want, but if you haven't heard what he's been saying, it's just pretty horrific. So I don't understand why he was there, because I wouldn't want to be attached to anybody that was there, sibling or not, at that particular moment, and he got the crowd riled up. Maybe some of the crowd doesn't even know, who knows, but I know, and I just thought it was horrific. So I couldn't believe he was there. But then I see Floyd walk out, and I've never been the biggest fan of Floyd. I've usually cheered for the other guys fighting Floyd, because he really doesn't go for it, but he sells, and he's great defensively and everything, but I was in awe, man. I was watching, go, man, that's one of the greatest walking out. And it was kind of cool that he took a back seat to his boxer and let him shine, but yet still also elevated, you know? So he's like, I always say, pull someone up. You know, when you have some success, pull someone up. And Floyd did it, man. I commend him for that. So like I said, I was just emotions, man, throughout the night, just seeing all this play out. It overwhelmed me, but I was so stoked to be there. As tired as I was by the end of the night, I was really, really happy. But did you catch that, man? The irony in two guys that are actually throwing some of the nicest jabs and body shots, they were getting booed, but yet the slobber knockers, the barn burners, the heart stoppers, you know, those types of fights, they were the ones getting cheered. And it just goes to show that if you have a name, that's what matters at the gate and to the fan that walks in and pays their money.
Yeah, this crowd didn't show up to see technical boxing. Come on now. They weren't there for that. They weren't there for the actual, you know, scoring of rounds throughout, you know, a 12-round fight, 10-round fights. They wanted to see somebody go out there and try to knock each other's heads off. And that is not what with Jacobs and Mosley Jr. gave you. They gave you a clean technical boxing match. I mean, dude, we're talking about a former champion in there trying to prove that he can still go against a young lion. You know, and it turned out to be, you know, one of those technical boxing matches where it was like, hey, I'm gonna drag you to these later rounds and see if you can really hang with me. I'm a former champion. I'm trying to prove I can still go. And you know, the younger guy got it, but that is not at all what this crowd was wanting. They knew that the undercard had already provided some electrifying moments, some incredible finishes, you know, stuff like that, some fun moments. And some characters, like you mentioned, like the Floyd Mayweathers of the world and his young boxer in the Ryan Garcia show, the Sean Garcia show, Amado Vargas, like that fight was amazing. By the way, if you guys didn't see that on the undercard, go back and watch it. Like that's a fight worth going back and watching. But also the placement of it. So you get a clean technical boxing match before the main event. So there's like, okay, we're not here to see this, and we're also ready to see Nate and Jorge. So get through this, please, and let's get to this main event. So it was like kind of like, you know, bad timing mixed with the crowd, who's not really a boxing crowd. But I think that's one thing that boxing as a whole can kind of take away from this and really take away from MMA, which I think they're actually starting to do more now, especially what you consider what they're trying to do over in Saudi, you know, with Riyadh season. They're trying to fill out a full card for boxing to where you're going to want to watch early. And it's not just the main event that you're tuning in for. They want you to tune in for a whole card, like you do for MMA, like you do for UFC events, week in and week out. You're going to tune in for more than just the main event.
Yeah. Like I say, I even think Dana White was taking notes and regretting that he's not in boxing. He keeps saying boxing, I don't want to dip in. Then you'll see him wear Zuffa boxing. You'll see him support the career of Callum Walsh. You know, he used to train boxers. I just don't understand why he won't use some of the athletes that have either fizzled out or they're just too old or whatever, and do something from that end. I mean, instead of power slap, whatever, whole other topic, but there is something still to be said for a good boxing event, man. And Saturday night proved it. So let's talk about the fight itself. Diaz versus Masvidal. Very controversial scores. I wasn't judging it like a judge. I was just taking it in, watching, seeing one guy with cleaner boxing in Masvidal and another guy with more voluminous boxing in Diaz. But even if you look at the scorecard, or sorry, the scoring data that was given to us, Masvidal still landed more significant strikes. But at the same time, if you're doing all those in just a few set of rounds, you're not going to win the other rounds. And that's maybe what happened. I mean, basically, it's like they say, it's 10 individual 3-round fights. They get the 10 and the 9. There was no knockdown, so there was no 10-8s or 10-7s or anything. But I was just blown away to hear that Diaz won 8-2 on one judge's scorecard, 7-3 on another judge's scorecard. And I wasn't cheering for a draw, but when I heard 95-95, I go, yeah, that sounds about right to me, because that's kind of what I was watching. One guy that just had a ton of volume, and the crowd would really go nuts. You know, it would pop every time he would throw 10 punch combos, even if some of them were just pitter patter. And I can imagine judges kind of getting influenced by that a little bit as well. But How did you guys score it? How did you guys think of what did you guys think of the judging? Careful with that word robbery. I'm not always a big fan of it, but I understand it's in play here. Nolan, what do you think?
Yeah, I had it as a draw, and I said like I kind of hated myself to kind of come to that scorecard because it does seem like a cop out, right? Two guys have a great fight. Oh, it's a draw, yay. But I felt that was, you know, that when you're scoring these fights, right, and you kind of have these close rounds in your head, you start to think, all right, well, I scored round 3 for Masvidal, but it could have gone Diaz's way, or I scored round 3 for Diaz and it could have gone Masvidal's way. You start having that internal calculator. And for me, I felt like it had to be either a draw or some of those rounds that I maybe leaned towards Diaz could have also gone towards Masvidal. So I felt like, having watched that fight, that there was a very good chance that it would either be a draw or Masvidal. So to hear that one judge had whatever it was, an 8-round difference for Diaz, I was very surprised by. Really what this came down to, George, and you said it there, this was a classic example of volume versus quality versus quantity. Diaz was landing a lot of shots. Masvidal seemed to be throwing significantly less, but when he did, he was getting reactions out of Diaz, and maybe more reactions than we've seen from Nate in a while. Granted, Nate usually just walks right through everything, and he kind of still did that here, but you could tell some of those punches, the body shots, the punches to the head, they were hurting. Those were significant shots. So I can't really argue with the draw. Maybe even if they had a Diaz by a 1-round advantage or a 2-round advantage, maybe. But to kind of have these massively lopsided scorecards, I think I couldn't see it going that way. And so, yeah, man, it's tough. I feel like we obviously have a big problem in MMA. I'm a casual boxing fan, but seeing all the people that I trust in the boxing world talk about the judging there, it seems like potentially even worse. So not necessarily surprising per se, but I definitely thought Jorge, if you were to score the fight as a whole, which I know that's not the way you do it, I thought Jorge did the most damage. I thought he landed the biggest shots and had the biggest moments.
Mm-hmm. All right, Goes, have you had a chance to catch your breath and think about what you witnessed, maybe gone over the fight again? I think I kind of know where you're headed. Same thing as me. It didn't look like no 8-2, 7-3 either way. It looked more of a parity fight, but what were your thoughts on the scoring?
I agree with Nolan. When I heard that first card, I said, you know what? That's probably that could be very possible. Because I do remember halfway through the fight looking at George and going, I think we're even here at this point. They were almost trading rounds. Jorge did hit him with the more meaningful shots. He worked the body a lot, but Diaz did overwhelm him with volume. And I think Jorge Masvidal might have been caught up too much in trying to be a boxer. And I think that might have hurt him a little bit. It seemed like he was conserving his energy. He was exploding for 20, 30 seconds at a time and then kind of taking his foot off the gas. I think this is the problem when you have mixed martial artists doing boxing. I think the judges have a difficulty trying to score those types of fights. And what I mean by that is, like, when you have boxers who have a history and you kind of know what they've been through, right? So like if Floyd Mayweather, you don't know how many punches hit that guy's gloves, right? And at no point do you go, oh, he might be hurt, or he's just covering up. Like, what he's doing. He's setting you up so that he could hit you on the counter. But when you don't have a history like that for like a Jorge Masvidal, you might actually think, I think he's hurt. I think he's just covering up. And I think that's what kind of makes it a little difficult for some of these judges to box these or to judge these types of boxing fights. It's not good for you to just sit back there and cover up like that, especially when you're in a hostile environment where 90% of the arena is cheering for the other guy. I could see how people could get a little confused, but everybody around me, we kind of, at the end of the fight, we all looked at each other and we all kind of went, Masvidal, maybe not by much, but maybe by a round or 2 or something like that. But to have it 7-3 the other way, I don't really understand that judging wise, but I kind of understand. It just felt like the crowd was judging that fight that night.
Exactly.
It really did. Those two cards, I feel like if they just passed out cards like at a movie premiere and they go, hey, what'd you think of one? That's probably what they would say. It didn't feel like a judge's scorecard. And that's unfortunate, because there's so much on the line for each fighter, and especially Jorge Masvidal in this particular instance. it's just not a good look, man. I don't know. I thought it was a lot closer. And I don't have a problem. If you say Diaz won the fight, I'd say maybe I can make an argument for that. But to be that much of a landslide, no.
Matt Wells, how'd you feel about the scorecards? How'd you score it?
I think, well, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't get to see the entire fight in full.
Oh,
Thanks
that's
to
right.
Cameo, but I'll just remind some folks, there is a very clear difference in boxing scoring versus MMA scoring. And that's probably why we saw what we saw on the scorecards. In boxing, you're going to see judges favor more active fighters more often. They're going to favor ring generalship a lot more. They're going to weigh that a lot heavier because that's significant in boxing. So the fighter that's, really controlling the fight, setting the tone, so to speak, the fighter that is, as it says on the scoring criteria, that puts himself in a position to score and not be scored upon. And it felt like, from the later rounds that I saw, when my stream finally kicked back in, it felt like that's what Nate was doing for the later half of the fight, or the last 3 or 4 rounds of the fight. So I'm not sure what quite really happened there in the middle. It sounded like, from what I was gathering, as the fight was going on through Twitter and social media, that it was like what Goes was saying, that the bigger shots, or that Nolan was saying that the bigger shots were coming from Jorge, while Nate was just throwing the volume. And again, like, that's what judges like in boxing sometimes. If you're throwing a lot of volume out there, that's going to win you rounds. And it seems like that's what Nate was doing. And I guess that's what we should have expected from Nate. Nate's never been a real heavy puncher. He was like that in MMA. Same with Nick. They were known as guys that were going to go in there and just pepper you with a lot of punches, a lot of strikes, 30-40% power strikes, and then just overwhelm you. And of course, the thing that you can't teach at all is that they have iron chins. So they're going to walk through anything that you hit them with. And that's from what I saw in a lot of those highlights. Jorge was hitting Nate with some big shots, but Nate was like, okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought it up, because if you just look at the aesthetics, Jorge hit him with cleaner boxing punches, the technique, everything. But Nate ate him, and it was almost like it was nothing. So for that one moment when the judge is taking into consideration what he's watching, he's probably not feeling that the punch was as effective as maybe the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And yet when Nate was doing pitter patter, because Jorge would just cover up and not bob and weave and just kind of take it, it almost looked like poor defense by a guy that's getting hit by something he can't defend. And so the aesthetics made it look like those punches were even more effective than they weren't. I saw them both at the end of the fights, and Jorge wasn't marked up at all. I mean, he really looked like he was fine. Nate looked like, hey, I've been in a fight here. And he even gave Jorge credit that, yeah, the dude can hit, but it wasn't his night. He would pivot and say whatever he had to say, but he did give credit that he was in there with a dog. But I'm glad you also mapped out the scoring criteria. It is different in boxing. I've seen that as well. The general ringmanship or something like that, the activities. So, and we've been so conditioned in the last 2 years, damage in mixed martial arts. I think that's why maybe I was programmed to just think, oh, that was a damaging hook. That was a damaging shot to the body or whatever. But yeah, it was really, really confusing. Didn't take away from the event. Now they're 1-1. What's next for each guy, guys? Nolan, what do you do with Jorge Masvidal next? He was the losing party, but it is 1-1.
Yeah, I mean, he seems like he's going to try to go back to MMA. I mean, I think that's the vibe that I'm getting. I think he said it in an interview, I believe, with you guys, right? Right, George?
Yeah, he did leave that open, yeah.
Yeah, so I am curious if there would be interest on the UFC's end. Obviously, he's still under contract with them. I don't know what kind of fights they would make for him, or what his motives would be, other than just maybe getting some, paychecks and getting some more fights in his career. But I definitely think that would probably be a better avenue for him at this point. I'm not sure what other matches are out there. I mean, I guess, hey, like him and, Jake Paul or something. I mean, that's always there, but that's kind of, there's only one guy. I guess now there's 2 that Jake Paul has scheduled at once, with him fighting Mike Perry and then Mike Tyson. But outside of that, if he can't land that, I think going back to the UFC wouldn't be the craziest thing. But the thing is, like, he's got his promotion going on too, which I think has has added something kind of interesting to the combat sports space. I think the bare knuckle MMA, getting some of those veteran guys that maybe don't have a home, like they're too good to fight on the regionals, but PFL doesn't want them. I think there's a middle ground there to get some of the the JDSs of the world and the Roy Nelsons of the world to kind of have them in, some sort of fighting opportunity. So I don't think he really needs to be doing this anymore. Do I think he will? Yeah, I think he'll probably come back. And I think if he's already saying it's going to be the UFC, I think it's either now or maybe one more boxing match and then he's there.
Yeah. I like Darren Till for Jorge Masvidal. They got history. Do it in England.
Yeah.
I don't know. How about you guys? What do you do with Nate Diaz? He seems to have more doors open.
Whew, man, I got to imagine Jake Paul's probably licking his chops, right? Seeing how much money he could make in a rematch here. Nate does have a lot of options, right? He can do that with Jake Paul. Hell, even a rematch with Jorge Masvidal. We talked to Masvidal after the fight, and he said he wants that rubber match in boxing. He says he's a sore loser. If you do that, I can't remember if it was Nolan or Matt that said it, but, maybe in Florida, maybe in Vegas, where now you get a whole different crowd. You could definitely do something like that. He does have possibilities and a lot of cards to play in mixed martial arts, but I'll be honest, guys, I feel like that's getting further and further away. If you were in that arena and you saw how much it popped and how many people he brought to the show and how much of the money he's pocketing, I don't know that he wants to go back to the UFC and give them back that power. I think he's kind of happy calling the shots and doing what he can here, and he does have options. So remember, he's not a spring chicken, right? This ain't gonna last forever. So I think those possibilities in MMA will always be there, but they're getting further and further away with the success of what he's doing outside of the cage.
Man, every time you guys say that, I'm 15 years older than these guys, and if they're not spring chickens, then I'm like some desert tortoise or something. But all right, sorry, Matt Wells, you get stuck with the not so popular fighter of the three that came from MMA. How about Anthony Pettis? He lost to Chris Avila. Man, wherever he goes, he does seem to get paid. He always lands on his feet, but this wasn't the best showing for Pettis. What would you do with him next?
I would do anything that involves him having the ability to kick, because without that, it's just not the same guy that we all know and love. He needs to be able to throw some kicks in there. I mean, he was entertaining, I think, when he did the karate thing. It's Anthony Pettis. It's weird. It's a mixed bag with him. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get at this point. I mean, just look at his record. You see a win over Roy Jones and a loss to Chris Avila. That's a very stark contrast. Yes. and just on paper, it's crazy. So, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Anthony Pettis. And I know, like, as much as I hate this, he just seems like a guy that's going to do anything at this point. I would not be surprised to see Anthony Pettis show up on Power Slap, honestly.
Really?
as much as I
thought you were going to say bare knuckle.
Yeah. I mean, either one. I mean, he could do bare knuckle, I think Anthony Pettis and, Mike Perry could be a thing that we see in bare knuckle as well. Who knows? He's one of those guys at this point. He just seems to have fun doing any and everything combat sports related. So I wouldn't put it past him to do anything at this point.
Yeah. I don't know. He lands on his feet though. He got paid well at PFL.
Yeah.
And he got the Roy Jones Jr. fight, and he got this one. And Junkie released the salaries. I know somebody was giving us a shout out here in the chat room that accompanies the show, and I'll get to a few of those comments and questions right now. But yeah, I mean, like I say, he just always seems to land on his feet. But in this showing, he didn't look that good, and the guy he lost to doesn't carry the name. Like if you lose to Roy Jones Jr. in boxing, you go, what do you want? The guy's Roy Jones Jr. But Chris Avila, you lost to him, and the fight wasn't that good, and you also didn't look good. I don't know. I mean, I always want these guys to make money where they can, because their names are most valuable at the tail end of their career, unfortunately, when they aren't what they used to be. Joseph Bosa says they were smart to move the date when they did. 18,000 fans were there from the word go. Yeah, man, it was pretty much like you said. Lazy Bed says similar cast of characters to Showtime too. Matt Wells was bringing that up. Mauro Ranallo, Brian Campbell, Josh Thompson, Amanda Guerra. So I'm sure some of that did carry over. Mark England says Connor made more than both boxers put together. That's madness. Well, yeah, I think what he's referring to is not the fight versus Floyd, where he got 100 million supposedly. He's actually saying that Connor, he bet on Nate Diaz 500,000 at like plus 220 odds or something like that. So I think he took home 1.6 million. So that was interesting. A former foe, one that he's lost to as well, is beaten. But he put that aside. He put some money out there. And yes, there's always these disclaimers that we put on MMA Junkie, but I'll just say it to you guys. What you saw, which was Nate Diaz getting 500 and Jorge Masvidal getting 300,000, that's not in addition to pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they also take some sort of a cut because they're actually the promoters of the event as well. Not the entire, they didn't do the entire promoting. They had a share in the promoting. So I'm sure there was different monies that they made that way. Being able to walk in with a robe and promote something as well, you know, your shorts, the canvas. I mean, they were dipping into a lot of things. And so back to what Goes is saying, do they really want to go back to MMA when they just put on one hell of a show like they did, and they had such a big hand in wearing what they wanted, walking out to whatever they wanted with however many people they wanted? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's probably hard to turn away from. So I almost feel like they may say it, but they don't mean it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't know.